this is a fully retooled coach that does not owe anything in its heritage to the original Triang model. Hi there everyone, I hope I find you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you back to the channel up here into the loft on Weir Yard. Now today we've got a review of a model which has been a perennial classic, well, right back to the days of Triang. This is a model which so many people have had in their collection over the years, myself included, and it's really nice to see that Hornby have got round to completely retooling this van and bringing it up to a fully modern specification. I am of course talking about the all-new gangway bogie luggage van which they've brought out, which you'll probably remember most as being the van that was used in Sir Winston Churchill's funeral train. Now that particular one had an interesting history. By the time it was used on Sir Winston Churchill's funeral train, it had actually gone through the process of being withdrawn and was in the scrap line at Stewart's Lane. Selected because it was probably in the best condition of all of the examples that were there. It was refurbished, repainted, and probably it was chosen for its use simply because it was gangwayed, which meant that people could move between it and the rest of the train, but also that it had good access through its wide doors for getting that coffin in and out. Because of that particular example, well, it survived long enough to not just do a tour of America, but end up in the National Railway Museum, where it can be seen to this day. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to Hornby, who have sent over an example of this model for review. And also don't forget that we've got an affiliate link in the description box down below, which takes you to Hatton's Model Railways to find examples of this model. But also don't forget to support your local model shop, and there's a lot out there, and I'm sure that they will also appreciate your custom. As you'll see later on in this video, it actually has come out at a really competitive price, so certainly this is one not to miss. This is the model that Hornby have sent over very kindly for review. Now it's one of their new bogie gangway luggage vans, and you might recognise the style of van as one that's been in the Hornby range, well, for longer than I can remember. In fact, I believe its original origins, well, the previous version of this, its original origins, were actually with Triang, and it's been a perennial classic, coming out in a lot of different liveries, and it's certainly really held its own for a good number of decades. But the last time it was released, it was kind of not really hanging on to keeping up with some of the much newer super detailed releases. So it's really great to see that Hornby have fully retooled this model from the ground up. Now for me, it's something that I think is going to play into the nostalgia market, because certainly people of my age and older have had models like these in their collection from when they were young, and it's really nice to see a fully retooled high-spec version appear in the range. And it finally means that we can recreate fully some of the classic trains from days gone by that used these vans, with a van that matches up with the coaching stock, the previous version having the large goalpost type couplings for one. Now I haven't had this out of the box yet, and we've got a catalogue number there, R60020, and I think Hornby ran out of the 4-digit numbers, so we've now moved up to a 5-digit catalogue number. And this is the Southern Railway version of the GBL luggage van, although I think the L in GBL, I'm thinking that's gangway bogie luggage, is duplicated there, but it's just one of my pet gripes with pin number and LCD display. Just putting that out there. Sorry, my OCD, or to make it alphabetically correct, CDO, just notices those sort of things. It's got the running number 2362, and Hornby, I believe, have made this available with a number of different running numbers and identities, and it is available as well in the southern region green, although what I've heard from a lot of people anecdotally and certainly from photographs is it's actually very difficult to tell which of these received a repaint and which were just running in the old Southern Railway livery but covered by an awful lot of grime. One of the prototype coaches, though, is most famous for having been the hearse wagon in Winston Churchill's funeral train. And that particular example is actually preserved, and it's the one that you can go and see at the National Railway Museum. Last time I saw it, I think it was at Shildon. I think it may still be at the Shildon outreach of the National Railway Museum. This model actually comes with a separate detail bag, and we've got some brake hoses there. So they look to be, I'm guessing, vacuum hoses. And the second set of hoses, I don't know whether they would be steam heat pipes, or maybe this was dual braked with the Westinghouse air brake system as well. I'm not entirely sure, but they are there for the user to apply if you wish to. But what I will warn you is that these will most likely interfere with the tension lock couplings. We've also got what look to be, I'm going to guess that these may well be steps. Not entirely sure. There isn't actually any paperwork in the box to explain, just looking on the back there, to explain where these go. So it is left a little bit for the user to work it out. It's in the standard clamshell type packaging. Just going to get that out from there. And immediately we can see that this is a fully retooled coach that does not owe anything in its heritage to the original Triang model. In terms of length, it does appear to be the proper scale length, and that's something that Triang-derived coaches did tend to suffer from. That Triang, economies of scale, it was different times in the 1960s and 70s and even into the 1980s where model trains were concerned, that quite often companies would try and make models that would utilise common underframes, common bogies, and that's why we get things like the older BG full-braked Mark 1s that are actually the same length as the rest of the Mark 1 range, just so that they have commonality of underframes. But in this day and age, the modeler does demand a greater level of realism. And in retooling this model, it does mean that Hornby has the opportunity to produce something that is now scale length, or as near as is practical to be. And we've also got a whole host of separate applied detail. The couplings as well, gone are the huge, I call them the goalpost couplings. I'm not sure if they actually have an official name, probably just the Mark 1 tension lock couplings. And instead we've got slimline tension lock couplings in NEM pockets here. And these are on a, it feels like, if I thought that they were on a self-centering mechanism. Yes, it is. It's just, I think when it's held upside down, the hook there does tend to jam on the buffers. It is a little bit stiff in places, but there we go. I think sometimes you occasionally find that in transit the spring does just get a little bit jammed, but that's freed up okay there. And what this means is that it allows the coaches to be closer coupled on the straights, so you don't end up with huge air gaps between the gangways there. But then on the curves, on tighter curves, it allows a slightly greater spacing so you don't get the buffer lock. The buffers themselves here, I've just realised, are fully sprung. So this is a no expense spared retool of the model. You can see there turned metal heads, and there is actually quite a good level of spring to these. And just giving them a quick tug there, they are firmly in place. The springs, as far as I can tell, actually yes, interestingly enough, the springs are actually a springy piece of plastic that's just held behind the buffer heads. So one end springs one buffer and the other end does the other. And what that actually means is that that is a much more durable and reliable method than having a spring somewhere inside the buffers, and it probably makes them cheaper to produce. So actually that's a really clever way of doing that. The rest of these bogies really are nice. All of the brake rigging and the stretchers on there, they're all factory applied, as are the footboards, and yeah, they are actually all separate pieces, so there's a lot going on in there. The wheels, the brake shoes do line up with the wheel treads, and the wheels themselves are turned metal and pretty nice free running. And what I do particularly like as well is if you look closely there, the brake shoes are actually very, very close to the wheel tread, so much so that they're inside the diameter of the flanges. And for me, that is something which always does look really, really good. Looking to the rest of the detail, the livery application is really, really nice. Southern Railway green always looks good on these type of wagons. And we've got a whole host of detail. These wagons were actually externally quite complex. You can see the strengthening ribs on the outside there with the planking. I guess this was so that on the inside you didn't have any ribs getting in the way, which meant that there was less likely for stuff to get either damaged moving it around, or just simply to get caught on the side and be more difficult for the crews to maneuver around. The planking as well is really nice and crisply done, just getting up there nice and close. And you can see not only do we have some really nice bolt head detail on the strapping, but the planks are really nice and crisp as well. The ventilators too, really nicely done. I'm just trying to look to the underside. I think they're moulded on. In fact, I'm almost certain they're moulded on. But the moulded on detail is actually really, really nicely represented here, to the point where it's actually, if it's difficult to tell if it's moulded on or not, then really I think that's job done. The toolmaker has really done an exceptional job. Looking to the handles on there, I really can't tell if that's separately applied or moulded on, but it certainly has the appearance of being separately applied. Just looking down there, do we actually have an air gap underneath? I think we do, yes we do. So that's really nicely done. The windows as well, we got that the white bars as well behind the glazing. The glazing itself is pretty much flush fit in there. Really nice. I'm just seeing if I can see. I can't tell if there's an interior, but actually the fact that you can't really see anything other than dark and gloom in there, it doesn't really matter if there's no interior. In fact, I would be very surprised if Hornby had put an interior in there. I'm not going to dismantle the coach to find out. I don't think it's actually important whether it does or doesn't, but it really does capture that sort of dark void of what would be inside these normally quite mundane utility vehicles. You can see all the way through just the glazing on the other side there, but it's really nicely done. I also like the chassis detail. You can see there lots and lots of rivet detail, same for the bogies as well. And we do appear to have, are they separately applied? They are actually separately applied footboards below the doors. Again, nicely done. Printing there with the on and the off for the handbrake. Separate handbrake wheels finished in the white. They do look really good like that. And then we've got underframe detail. There's a lot of detail going on in this. And we've got this Southern Railway Ashford Works plate there, which is separately printed on, but in a way that actually does look like a plate. There is a little bit of glue squeezed out around some of the separately applied detail. Bear in mind that this is under a very bright light. The glue itself would have a much more glossy finish, so that's why you can see it. From normal viewing distances, you're not really going to see that, and in some respects it's probably better that there's slightly too much glue than slightly too little, because I think it's a real bugbear of a lot of modelers when detail just spontaneously drops off stuff on the track, and I don't think that there's any risk of that happening with this model. I also like these quite delicate footboards on the ends. They are quite robust. I'm going to guess that they're made from something like etched brass, something like that, that's then been painted to the chassis colour. But I do like robust detail as well, and it looks nice and fine, but is handling my rough pushing and pulling it quite well. The gangway ends, another very prominent feature of these coaches, are really nicely realised. I particularly like that scissor effect that's moulded in there, which, if you ever see a real one, is how they have their spring to them. You have the concertina of the material of the canvas, and then these sort of metal stretchers in a scissor motif that just kind of holds it all together, but gives it enough spring that it can cope with being pushed and pulled within the consist of the train. We have these end doors finished in the wood colour. Actually, that does work quite well. And the ends of this coach are finished in this plainer black as per the prototype. We've also got the very, very delicately printed information plates there, which give details about, amongst other things, its wheelbase. And that is actually a really sharp finish on that printing. The rest of the detail on the end of the coach, there's some that is moulded on, and you can see that the paint does seem to be slightly heavy on the application around these. We do seem to have a little bit of a ridge of paint clinging to the sides, but then we've also got separately applied handrails there curved up to the roof, which really do draw the eye and look really nice. The lamp iron too is separately applied, again suffering a little bit from excessive glue, but believe me, when you've not got this underneath a very harsh light, it isn't actually all that noticeable, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. On there we've got this Southern Railway lettering with that drop shadow, really nicely done. That is actually, for mundane lettering, that is quite complex actually, and you get that kind of 3D effect, really well done. Looking to the roof, we have a wealth of torpedo vents separately applied, and this white is kind of like a matte, sort of verging on satin finish white, really does look good in model form. The tumble home at the edge of the roof is captured well. It has that classic Ashford radius where the top of the roof is quite a shallow curve, and then that curve accelerates as it goes towards the edge and then tumbles down to the body sides. And it's something that's very characteristic of Southern Railway vehicles, not least a lot of their freight vans as well. All in all, I'd say that this is a really stellar release from Hornby. It's great to finally have a super detail version of this coach available in the range. It's available in the Southern Railway green, in the Southern Region green for British Rail, and also, for me, the highlight of the range is the Pullman liveried version for the Winston Churchill funeral train, which is sure to be a really great seller. In terms of price, these are actually available at quite a reasonable price for what you get. There is a wealth of detail on these, and we've got a link in the description box below to take you to where you can find all three of the different versions. At the time of filming, they are in stock. But be advised that these are selling very, very well, as befits the quality of the model, so they're not likely to hang around long. However, I suspect that they will be a perennial release in the Hornby range, so it has got ample opportunity to expand your fleet. I'm not sure what other liveries these may be able to run in. Certainly the Winston Churchill funeral hearse wagon livery is very unusual rather than the norm, and I don't believe that they lasted long enough to carry rail blue, but stand to be corrected on that. When it came to running, there did feel to be a little bit of binding on the wheels, and this increased its rolling resistance. It didn't seem to stop it from getting through even down to some quite tight curves, but there was a little bit of a grinding noise, and I put this down to those brake shoes being so close to the wheel. I suspect that they rub ever so slightly on the flange. It's not a huge problem, but it's one which I do have to note. Other than that, it did seem to run pretty well. So we turn now to the scores. First up is build quality, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the robustness of this build. Even the items that were separately applied, such as footboards and the door handles, were really well on there, and there did not feel like there was any risk of anything working loose. It does have to be said, though, that there was an excess of glue used on some of the smaller fittings, and this had oozed out, which under very close magnification did mean that we had a slight shiny appearance just around the base of some of the footboards and the end lamp iron. But all in all, I'm going to give this a 9.8. When it came to running quality, the metal wheels did ensure that this van performed adequately on wear yard. It coped with changes in gradient, twisting, and also some quite complex point work, but there was a degree of binding somewhere on the wheel sets, which I think was down to the brake shoes just dragging a little bit, although I suspect that this is a compromise, that if you want the brake shoes to look prototypically accurate, there is going to be a risk of them dragging ever so slightly. Other than that, it did follow the locomotive perfectly well. There was a degree of extra running resistance, but overall the performance was still fine, and I'm going to give this an 8.1. On DCC fitting and innovation, the DCC fitting isn't really relevant, but in terms of innovation, Hornby have really again upped the game in terms of the finesse of the moulding. There's a lot of ribs and bolt heads and rivets on this, and they've all been captured really well. I particularly like these ventilators, which are a very prominent feature of these vans, and they have been captured ever so well, with no hint that they are a moulded on item, and indeed for a while it got me looking very closely just to make sure that they weren't separately applied, such was the effectiveness that they had been put together. I also really like those gangways on the end of the coach. Again, Hornby have upped the game with these, and they do look real, mimicking the construction of the prototypes ever so well. I really like that scissor effect of the structure with the canvas humped loose in between. They look like they could be a real working item. So all in all, this goes to give it a 9.1. When it comes to accuracy and build quality, first up, the accuracy of the model really is good. Hornby have put behind themselves that Triang legacy of the previous model and have started from the ground up producing a really high quality model. They've not allowed themselves to be bogged down by any of that older heritage and have put this out as if they were making an all new model from scratch. So the end result really is good. The slightly excessive glue around some of the detail parts, as mentioned before, did kind of mar the finish in places, but you have to look quite closely to see that, and it's not a deal breaker for me. In fact, I'd rather have too much glue than too little, as one of my bugbears is detail parts that just shed themselves into the box and onto the track, which really doesn't do anybody any good whatsoever. The other area which I picked up on was the ends of this van, where the detail that is moulded on just looked to be ever so slightly too heavily painted, and we ended up with a kind of ridge of paint just around the detail. But other than that, this was a really good model with a lot of great features that have been expertly realised, and I'm going to give this a 9.0. When it came to value for money, this is an area that this coach scores incredibly highly on. When looking around online, I can find them listed for pretty much around the £33 mark, which for a brand new, high detail bogied van of this nature really does bring it down into the affordable price range. We've already seen the emergence of the £70 plus coach in the market, and it's really nice to see that Hornby haven't overlooked those who are on a much more restrictive budget, and this model really does offer a great value for money. So I'm quite happy to give this a 9.8, which gives us a final score of 45.8, which is very credible for this model that Hornby has brought to the market of a firm old favourite, and it's finally had the makeover that it is so sorely needed for such a long time. I'm more than happy to purchase more of these to add to my collection, having seen this example, and Hornby have to be commended for giving this attention to detail to a model which was probably still selling reasonably well in their range, and they could have let it linger for quite some time to come, but they haven't, and this resulting van really is a nice model. It gets the full thumbs up from me. Well, I hope you found that video informative. If you did like this model and want to buy your own, then do check out our link in the description box down below, which takes you to Hatton's. But also, as I always say, do remember to support your local model shop. And today we're going to be name checking the Loco Shed in Whitefield, which is also a really great place to go and browse the second hand as well. I went there recently and it really is an Aladdin's cave of second hand items, so well worth a visit. But also don't forget that you can head on over to Patreon and help support the channel, and we also have an extensive range of merchandise which you should also find a link down below, where you can get your own Jenny Monday Club branded mugs, hoodies, t-shirts, and also stickers. And don't forget as well that we've got that Monday Club Acura scale wagon, which at the time of filming should be along shortly. But until next time, don't forget to tickle the like button, share this video, and subscribe as well if you haven't already done so, and ring that bell and click all notifications to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying take great care of yourself, happy modelling, bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, and NI Railways 4000 class. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.